This is Lunchtime Agenda.
G'day and welcome to the program. I'm David Lipson. Today, the former frontbencher Nicola Roxon gave an emotional endorsement of the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, in her final speech to Parliament before bowing out of politics.
She's an amazing Prime Minister, a great Labor leader and an impressive woman, and a good friend to me. And we should be proud of her and her work. We have a capable, tough, smart, determined woman as our Prime Minister, yet she has been subjected to some of the most crass, silly, petty, sexist and just plain rude behaviour for years. These latest events show us that there is a dangerous underbelly still compromising women in Australia, and that the feminist cause is just as urgent as before.
Julia Gillard today urged her caucus colleagues to focus on the nation, not the Labor Party, and spoke of the importance of the ALP remaining a party of purpose. She won't be at the caucus meeting next week, so today's address to caucus was the final address by Prime Minister Julia Gillard to the caucus before the election, unless a special meeting is called to settle the lingering Labor leadership water torture. Well, today, the former Queensland Premier Peter Beattie reiterated his point from last night that he wants to see someone like Bob Hawke intervene to settle the Labor leadership woes once and for all. Several MPs spoke out against that idea today.
We control our destiny. We always have, with respect to Mr Hawke. It would be, and Mr Beattie, sorry, it would be totally inappropriate for anyone to step in. We've made our decisions about our leader. We're loyal behind. Well, I'm rock solid behind the leader, Julia Gillard.
Joining me on the program today, Liberal MP Paul Fletcher and Labor MP Steve Georganas. Thanks for your time today. Steve Georganas, first to you. Would an intervention from Bob Hawke help put this to rest?
Certainly not. I heard what Graham Perrott just said, and I totally agree with him. The caucus determines the destination that we travel. The caucus will determine who is the leader. Currently, the leader and the Prime Minister is Julia Gillard. There is no challenge. Kevin Rudd has made it quite clear that there will be no challenge and that he's going nowhere. He made that point a couple of times in the media the last couple of weeks. So therefore, the discussions that we're hearing in the media, that we're hearing through the prisms of the media, are just that, discussions in the media. No one has made any phone calls or spoken to me, and I know I've been through a few leadership challenges. I know what the phones are like. I know the lead up to it, and that is not happening. So, as I said, we heard Kevin Rudd last week and the week before saying he's not going anywhere. The current Prime Minister is Julia Gillard, and it'll be Julia Gillard right through to the election day.
There is an eerie quiet in the building this week, but the suggestion is that the Rudd forces are holding their fire until next week. Are you absolutely certain that there will not be a challenge next week?
I'm pretty absolutely certain, and I say that because
pretty absolutely.
I'll take the pretty out. Absolutely certain, and I say that with confidence because I have been through leadership challenges. I have been a member of this caucus when we had a couple of challenges on Kim Beazley, the Julia Gillard and the Kevin Rudd challenge. There's been talk of leadership challenges. I know what it's like. The phones don't stop ringing. People start coming to your office. This is not happening. And the only discussions and the only conversations I have heard about the leadership challenge is when I come into programs to do an interview, or when the media is talking to me, or when the media are trying to find out what's going on. So, of course, there might be one or two people that are talking about it and are chattering about it. But then again, as I've said, no Prime Minister has the full confidence of 100% of their caucus, including people that I speak to on the Liberal side of politics who constantly are saying to me that Malcolm Turnbull will be a great leader for their party and would like to see him be the leader of their party. And I hear that conversation on a regular basis. So I'll go back to what Kevin Rudd said last week. There will be no challenge, and the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister and will be till the day of the election.
OK, well, we saw today several coalition frontbenchers rounding on Kevin Rudd, including Greg Hunt and Scott Morrison. Take a listen.
Between the untrustworthy and the incompetent. Kevin Rudd was the person who offered Australia free beer and delivered pink bats.
But we should never forget that Kevin Rudd was the master and commander of Labor's border failures, and nothing would change.
Paul Fletcher, is the Coalition worried about the prospect of a return to Kevin Rudd?
Well, David, I think the main point is, as you said in your introduction, you reported comments of the Prime Minister that Labor should be focusing on the nation, not on the party. It's too late. It's too late. They've had 3 years to do that, and the Australian people know that throughout that time, the Labor Party and Labor parliamentarians have been focused on their own careers. They've been focused on their own internal affairs, and they haven't been focused on meeting the challenges of this nation. So the Australian people will have a chance to make a decision, and they'll make an assessment of whether the current government has been sufficiently focused on the affairs of the country or whether they've been far too internally focused. And really, whoever the Labor Party puts up as a leader, that's a matter for them. From the Coalition's perspective, we are focused on the challenges that this nation faces, and we want to offer an alternative government that will be squarely focused on responding to those challenges.
So you wouldn't be worried if Kevin Rudd returned?
Look, it is completely a matter for the Labor Party. We will go to the people offering our plan, our real solutions, and that is our focus. The Labor Party will do what it wants to do. That's a matter for them. We are focused on the challenges that our nation faces and the things that we intend to do to help this wonderful country realise its full potential. That's what a government should be doing, not engaging on the kind of internal and relentless ongoing destabilisation and internal battles that seems to regrettably characterise this government. All the while, the marvellous potential of this country isn't being fully realised. That's what we want to do something about.
Well, Nicola Roxon's valedictory speech also contained a message to her party. Let's just hear some more of what the former Attorney-General and Health Minister said.
The truth is we might be down, but we're not out. Our party is older than the nation itself. Our causes are timeless, although they take on different forms over different decades. Whether it was Medicare and the snowy mountain schemes of the past, or disability care and the national broadband network of the future, Labor is the only party that delivers compassion and nation building in equal measure. We can and should be proud of this. We can and should focus more on this. We've allowed internal tensions to overshadow our core mission for too long. We are a proud party with a proud record. Now we need to start behaving like one.
You can see Martin Ferguson sitting behind Nicola Roxon there. Steve Georganas, it must be disappointing, sad perhaps, to see figures like this, powerful Labor figures like this, bowing out.
Oh, it is sad to see someone like Nicola Roxon leaving. She's contributed enormously to Australian politics and enormously to the portfolio of health, which I had the pleasure of working with her when I was chair of the Health and Ageing Committee, especially on the plain packaging tobacco, and she has contributed enormous amounts to this nation. But just going back about what we've been focusing on, we've been focusing on the challenges of getting through the global financial crisis unscathed. We've seen nearly 1 million jobs created since we've been in government. We've seen one of the best economies in the world, whilst other countries are falling apart. We've seen our unemployment rate, one of the lowest in the Western world. We're on 5.5%, whilst in Europe they're on double-digit numbers, 11% on average, and in some countries up to 25%. These are all good things that we have focused on over the last few years whilst we've been in government, ensuring that we have kept interest rates at one of the lowest levels, meaning that people now are $100 better off per week, $100 extra on average in their pockets through their interest rates. That's $400 a month better off. So these are the things that we've focused on. And I think when people are making valedictory speeches, they are emotional speeches. And certainly Nicola Roxon has been part of that cabinet who has contributed such tremendous things to this nation. The NDIS, another example, giving people dignity with disabilities, something that's never been done in this country for years. We've always tinkered around the edges and never been able to provide the services for those people. We will now be able to ensure that those people have the same opportunities through services and health that the rest of the population has. These are positive things, and these are the things that these are the challenges that we've been facing and the challenges we've delivered on in the 6 years that we've been in government.
Paul Fletcher, is that what this Labor government will be remembered for, if indeed there is a shift in September?
Well, I think the thing that will characterise this Labor government has been instability, internal division. They can't even choose amongst themselves who should be leading them, and that has been a constant running sore for this government. And then the other thing that will characterise this government is responding to the agenda of the union movement, which is an increasingly small percentage of the population. Only 12 to 13% of Australians are in the private sector are members of a union, but you have a government which is drawn very heavily from a narrow union background. So this has not been a competent or capable or stable government, and what we will be putting to the Australian people at the forthcoming election is we have a clear plan for Australia, and we want this country to be able to realise its full potential.
Well, just on the influence of the union movement, the Coalition's claim today and previously has been that the issue of 457 visas for foreign workers, temporary workers in Australia, and the crackdown that the government is embarking upon, and we see the legislation being debated today, the allegation is that that is really at the behest of the union movement and that there's not really any systemic rorting going on, although there is some evidence of it. What's the justification for these changes?
There is justification. Number one, these visas are not capped, so therefore the government will respond to the needs of skills in this nation. But what the government is saying, just like they did in Canada, the Canadian government has changed their legislation as well in this area of overseas workers, temporary workers coming in, is to ensure that when employers are taking someone on from overseas, that they have done all that's possible to employ someone locally. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. Exhausting all the avenues first of local employment, Australian workers in local areas, before you go offshore to find a worker if you can't fill that particular skill. So the justification is that we want to ensure that the legislation is being adhered to. There have been cases, I have seen cases myself in South Australia where people have been brought over as head chefs only to be doing dishes in a restaurant and staying at the boss's place, not being able to get their wages and be paid, and a whole range of things. And I've seen a few of these examples. So what this does is not stopping the 457 visas. Of course, there's industries that cannot get skills here and need to source people from overseas to fill those skilled positions. What this is about is ensuring that we do all that we can to fill those positions locally, where there's local employment available, local people that need the jobs, that they will get their first preference. And it's just about the employers ensuring that they stick to the rules. So I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I think this is good legislation, and legislation that will ensure that...
It makes some sense to crack down before the problem becomes too big, doesn't it?
We've never seen the substantial evidence of a systemic problem. What we do have is a minister who appears to have pulled a number out of the air in terms of the number of cases of problems he says exist with 457 visas. Let's be clear, the reason that we have a 457 visa system is so that people can be brought into Australia who have critical skills to allow businesses to flourish, to allow projects to proceed. Now, if that's good enough for the National Office of the Transport Workers Union, which has people employed on Section 457 visas, if that's good enough for Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who has a senior advisor employed on a 457 visa, those are powerful pieces of evidence that there are real benefits in having the flexibility to bring in people who have these key skills. And the other important point is this, that increasingly, very often, it's about getting the people in with the key skills who are critical to the project, where those people can't be found in Australia, and then that lets you build around that the employment of many other people, typically hired locally. So if you make it harder, if you impose more red tape and more restrictions, then you are constraining the ability to seize these growth opportunities. The fact is, most Australians, I think, will be very suspicious that this is yet again the government responding to what is a long-held dear objective of the union movement, as they've done on issue after issue, like the Road Transport Remuneration Tribunal, like the changes to coastal shipping, and a whole range of areas. They've responded to the agenda of the union movement. That's been bad for Australia's prosperity, bad for our economy, and I think most Australians understand that.
Okay, just a quick response, and we've got to take a break.
The thing is, I think I have no problem with ensuring that we ensure that we fill these jobs with Australians first, if they can be filled by local employers workers, and I think the majority of Australians would agree with that we have to do all that we can to employ people here onshore, Australian workers. If those positions cannot be filled, of course, then people have the right to get their 457 visas and source the employment from overseas.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more after this.
That could be a simple mistake. Or a deliberate move for a long-term advantage.
Perhaps.
But no, you're someone who plans ahead. I'm thinking you don't make a move unless you've thought things through. And if you don't have an answer, you'll find someone who does.
ANZ Wealth Managers can help you make the right moves to achieve your long-term goals.
Nice move.
The Gonski funding deal means an extra $5 billion for all New South Wales schools. That means more resources where they're needed most and more individual attention for our kids. But Tony Abbott is saying no to this urgent funding. Tell him our kids need him to say yes. Our kids are worth it. Authorised by A. Gavrolatis, Australian Education Union, Melbourne.
Officeworks works for your business. It's easy to shop in store with our extended trading hours or online 24/7 through your personalised business portal, or speak to your own account manager. Visit Officeworks Business online and find out how Officeworks works for you.
Why can't we put energy to sleep at night?
At Hitachi, we're inspired by challenging questions. That's why, using our advanced power systems and information technologies, we're creating integrated solutions to help cities meet the growing demand for energy, today and tomorrow. Hitachi Social Innovation.
It's our future.
Hitachi, inspire the next.
New South Wales is Australia's 5th largest state or territory. And of all of the land in New South Wales, 76% of it is used for agriculture. 7.6% is set aside and protected as national parks, and 1.8% of land is used for homes and housing, while mining temporarily uses only 0.1%, all of which is required to be rehabilitated when mining is complete. For more facts, visit landusefacts.com.au.
Tonight on Paul Murray Live, back to business for Julia Gillard, which means more trouble in Parliament and Kevin Rudd doing exactly what Kevin Rudd wants. I'll talk about it with Gary Hardgrave, Mark Davis and John Keogh. See you tonight, only on Sky News.
Holden, proudly sponsoring Paul Murray Live.
Welcome back. You're watching Lunchtime Agenda, and still with me here on this Tuesday in Canberra, Steve Georganas and Paul Fletcher. Now, I want to go to Holden because Holden and the unions have started discussions about the Elizabeth plant in South Australia, your home state, about achieving significant annual cost savings. Now, they're looking at labour-related cost reductions and productivity improvements. Now, that really reads either lower wages, less time on the clock. Steve Georganas, what's your reaction to this?
I'm glad that we are discussing this because what they're going through at the moment, Holden's and the workers, are their normal negotiations that take place for the next round of talks for their salaries, wages, etc. So what's happening now is a normal process. Of course, there'll be bargaining from both sides. There'll be perhaps amber claims made from both sides as well. I don't know, but that's something that you'd have to ask them what the claims are. But these are the discussions, normal part of the process. But I can say one thing, though, that Mr Devereux, the CEO of General Motors Holden's in South Australia, said that if the coalition tinkers with the assistance that they have been given, and we heard the Shadow Minister the other day say they would cut $500 million, Mr Devereux said that means they will shut down. And so it's quite clear that a vote for Tony Abbott is a vote to shut down GMH, not only in South Australia but also in Melbourne. So it's very important that we don't tinker with the assistance that's been put in place to secure jobs. In South Australia alone, there's over 16,000 jobs directly employed through the General Motors holdings, let alone all the other service industries. We could be talking up to 30,000, 40,000 jobs that will go if we tinker around the edges with the assistance packages that have been put in by this Labor government to assist the automotive industry, especially in my home state of South Australia.
Well, Paul Fletcher, it was a pretty blunt comment from Mike Devereux, I think it was last week. Is $500 million worth losing another car plant in this country?
Well, can I say I welcome the news from Holden today that they're looking for further efficiencies. Every business competes. Every business needs to find extra efficiencies. Every business in Australia needs to understand that it's facing a competitive landscape around the world. That's certainly true of automotive. It's true of every other sector as well. And the reality is that the most critical factor in the future of a car company and a car industry in Australia is the performance of those companies. It's the decisions they make. And indeed, I think what we can take away from what happened with Ford and the $34 million that Julia Gillard put in, announced just a year and a bit ago, which she promised was going to retain the jobs of those workers. I think what that tells us is ultimately it's the decisions made by the company and the performance of the company that's critical to its future. I mean, governments don't make commercial decisions, it's companies that make decisions.
And what, though, of the warning from Mike Devereux, which seemed to be, although not implicitly, aimed at the coalition? Sorry, not explicitly, I should say.
You naturally expect CEOs of companies to make their case. Of course, that's what they do. That's what they're paid by shareholders to do. And so he's being an advocate for his company and his industry, as you would expect senior executives to do.
OK. Well, look, one of the topics that I wanted to talk about coming out of caucus today as well, which we sort of skipped over, was the debate over giving the power back to the caucus, the Labor caucus, to decide the ministry. Now, this debate was pushed on forward to after the election. There'll be no decision or no vote on that today. Kevin Rudd was the one who originally actually introduced back in 2008 the rule that gave the leader the power to choose the team. Now he wants to turn it back to the old rules. Julia Gillard wants to maintain the status quo. Where do you stand on this, Steve Georganas?
Look, I'm not going to indulge in every trivial little detail that was discussed in caucus today. Caucus is a
just your
private
opinion,
affair.
though,
But my
on
opinion,
that.
look, for 100 years, the Labor caucus has been electing leaders. I think there's certainly that was changed in 2008, March of 2008, if I'm correct. And there is talk now about going back to the caucus electing its leader. We're a very democratic party. You've got to understand that we have branches, we have pre-selections, we have a whole range of things, and you know, most ALP people have been through ballots. I think it's a very democratic system to have the caucus elect their leader and cabinet and ministry, and so therefore I would be supporting it.
Did you want to see that happen today?
Well, look, I think it would be unfair to make any changes to a future caucus. So I think the discussions will take place, of course, at a future date. But there are discussions, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, what we do is we talk about things, how to evolve, how to make our caucus better. And as I said, it's going back to the status quo, as has been for 100 years in our caucus.
Yeah, what's the argument for the coalition, Paul Fletcher? Because in the coalition, the leader selects the team. Why don't you have a democratic process as Steve Georganas described it there in your party?
Look, we're quite happy to stack up the democratic processes in the Liberal Party against those in the Labor Party.
Let's just go to this
And
issue.
if you look, for example, at the approach to pre-selections, and you look at the way that candidates are parachuted in through the so-called N40 rule, the Labor Party's track record on democracy, we're quite happy to put the Liberal Party's...
Let's not argue about democracy, just on this one issue of selection of the front bench.
Well, look, we happen to do it a different way, just as we have different rules about crossing the floor, for example. In the Liberal Party, you can cross the floor and not be expelled immediately from the party. Labor has a different view, so we do things differently, where the two parties are not identical, despite what some people say. In fact, the two parties are quite different, and the choice the Australian people will have at this election is going to be a very stark choice between a party that's internally focused and a party, in the case of the coalition, that is focused on the needs and challenges facing our nation.
Okay, well, we saw another interview this morning with Corey Bernardi, someone who was on the front bench for the coalition, is no longer after he made comments where he linked gay marriage to bestiality. Well, he's not stepping away from the comments that he made, essentially saying that gay marriage is a slippery slope that can lead to all sorts of things. He was speaking to Fairfax Media earlier today.
They've riled some people, but you know, if we want to go back and truly examine them, Tim, I'd be happy to stand on my record, because a lot of what I've said, in fact most of what I've said, has been proved correct, whether it was about climate change or swearing on television or demands for changes to marriage and continuing demands in that area. I'll stand on the record and say, well, I was right. If we go back to what I suggested in the Parliament when the same-sex marriage debate came up, there is actually now a petition being put together for the House of Representatives by Green activists to legally recognise multi-member unions. Now, I said that would happen. It's happening.
Paul Fletcher, are you comfortable with that view?
Well, look, Corey is a member of the Parliamentary Party. He's a valued colleague. He's speaking in his capacity as a private member, or specifically a senator, and I think Corey's more than able to speak for himself. So I'll leave you to put questions to him about what he said.
And Steve Georganas?
I don't agree with Corey, even though I know Corey well. He's a fellow South Australian and I get on with him fairly well, but people have very strong views on this issue on both sides of the debate, and people certainly make some statements sometimes, and I don't agree with the statements that Corey's made.
And should anything further happen to him, and is it suitable for him to be in the party? I'm not.
Well, look, that's a matter for Paul Fletcher and his colleagues, but I certainly don't agree. We don't agree with the comments that he's made, and some of the comments have been quite outrageous, actually.
Okay. Well, we are out of time, but Steve Georganas, Paul Fletcher, thanks very much. You've got to get to questions.